Do you want to have pets but you're too busy or travel too much? Do you want to get looked at funny in the park? Make a closed jar ecosystem. It's incredibly easy. You scoop up some soil and some water from inside a pond and whatever aquatic plants you can find floating around or at the base of the pond. In this case, I also bought some aquarium plants in case the plants I found did not provide enough oxygen, but that's optional. And voila, you've got yourself a murky jar. But that changes quite dramatically. For this jar area, I added some duckweed there on the top, and those stringy plants are actually native, straight from the pond, and they will be incredibly important to this ecosystem. When the water clears, you're going to be absolutely shocked at just how many creatures are living in your random scoop of water. Now, I'm not a biologist, but I'm going to do my best to catalog each of these animals as they appeared chronologically in my jar. I was very happy to see this ostracod or seed shrimp because these little guys are signs of good water quality and they're actually great food for a lot of other organisms in the jar. I have no idea what this guy is, but he's having a great time. I noticed quite quickly that something was going wrong rapidly with all of the water boatmen in the tank. Within a number of hours, they started becoming covered in this fur. I think it may be some kind of fungal or bacterial infection, but it happened incredibly rapidly. Fun fact about water boatmen, they are the loudest animal in the world if you adjust for size, and that's because of their incredibly loud penises. By day 2, the jar was a bit more clear. You can see lots of activity even from the outside and so many more creatures to discover. Here we have countless tiny bacteria, a bacterial bloom. I was very happy to see that the boatmen were already laying eggs. You can even see their little eyes. And I hit the jackpot with this single solitary snail because not only will it be great for cleanup, but snails can reproduce asexually, and there's a chance, no spoilers, that I might get more snails in the future. And it was no surprise to see bloodworms or midge larvae. They will eventually pupate and become flies. Then there was this thing. Just look at this thing. At first I had no idea what I was looking at here, but I looked it up and it turns out I had quite a few dronefly larvae in this tank, otherwise known as rat-tailed maggots. They're absolutely transparent and they breathe through this long telescoping tube which can stretch out more than 3 times the length of their bodies. More on them later. By day 3, I started noticing some of the smaller inhabitants, and I found this teeny little copepod, a crustacean. There are many of them in this tank. You can also see a variety of microorganisms here at the top of the tank. The situation with the water boatman had gotten pretty dire. Here you see one dead at the top of the tank being made into food for countless microorganisms. Here we have 2 rat-tailed maggots wrestling, cleaning one another, something else. The amazing thing about these jars is that you can leave them shut for months or even years because there is a nutrient cycle within the ecosystem that will keep it viable as long as there are plants and a little bit of light coming in. Of course, many of the animals you're seeing here are in larval stage and will eventually need to be released so they can fly away. By day 5, the water was pretty murky because it was getting filled with sort of ambient algae. Here's my setup for viewing the jar. If you recognize the neighborhood, please don't stalk me. You can see this aquarium plant getting choked out by pink cyanobacteria. This is a lesson I learned quite early in this jar. It was best, in the end, to stick with native plants. Now, you really have to stay vigilant with these jars because you never know when you might miss a rat-tailed maggot love huddle. 5 or 6 of these rat-tailed maggots all curled up in a ball for some purpose. By day 7, there was only one solitary water boatman left. The infection seemed to have very little effect on this one, which was fantastic news. Hang in there, buddy. So far, the list of animals in this jar is already pretty impressive from just a random scoop. But the crazy thing is, day after day, I would keep discovering new species, either ones that had only recently emerged or ones that I had missed entirely before that time. By day 9, a couple of the rat-tailed maggots had actually pupated, as you can see here. More on that later. The one singular water boatman was doing pretty well, and as you can see here, I caught him feeding for the very first time, eating a delicious hole in the wall of algae on the glass. The jar was clear enough that I could see a whole lot more than before, which is great because it allowed me to see this newborn water boatman fresh out of the egg. All of these little eggs had finally started to hatch. Here's another one next to the last surviving boatman. But they're not alone here. Pretty soon, up pops a phantom midge larva, a cousin to the bloodworm. They would very much enjoy taking a bite out of this little nymph. He seems to sense the movement. Not too close. It was around this time that I went back to the pond to get another scoop of water, and that's where this dragonfly larva came from. This was a bad idea, by the way, leaving this thing in the jar. But at this time, I just felt like I needed a little more diversity, and I was still a beginner, so I went back for a little bit more plant material and ended up with some new animals as well. Here's another beautiful bacterial bloom. Although it looks gorgeous, it is not a good sign for the quality. It means there must be a lot of decaying matter in the tank somewhere that hopefully will work itself out in its own time. Well, my hope for new organisms was obviously panning out because here we have the beautiful helix-coiled shape of midge eggs. That means we're getting a whole lot of phantom midge larvae soon. You can see one right there squirming next to the mosquito larvae. There's a copepod as well. At this time, I tried to introduce some pond snails of a different species from this snail, which was still the only one from the original scoop. Unfortunately, they didn't survive, and I'm not sure why. Here we have two phantom midge larvae making a home in one case and a meal in another out of a dead rat-tailed maggot. By day 10, there were some really incredible cyanobacteria colors. As you can see here, not only the pink bacteria, but the floating white bacteria in the background with the beautiful green algae on the glass. It just looks like a polished gemstone. Every little speck is a living organism. The water boatman nymphs had voracious appetites, and they had already grown quite a bit in just one single day. By day 12, the little cylindrical sheath of phantom midge larva eggs was starting to wriggle a little bit. You can see a water boatman nymph there for scale and an adult there to the left. I only just noticed this egg sac, but very quickly the phantom midge larvae started wriggling their way out of the sac and starting their new life in the jar. One day later, and the sac was entirely empty, all of the larvae having spread out throughout the entire tank. And almost 2 weeks into this tank, I discovered a new larva, completely unknown to me. On day 15, I finally spotted two water boatmen mating. That explains all of the eggs all over this jar, and I think it's a pretty good sign for the overall health of the ecosystem. But also on this day, something really incredible started to happen. Many of the larvae had pupated and started to emerge as flies. The very first flyer was a mosquito, which unfortunately escaped into my office. There he goes. And while I haven't shown the rat-tailed maggots in a while, they were still dominating the tank. And here is the very first one, fully pupated and emerged as a drone fly. Lucky for me, this one escaped out my window. Many animals were now in pupal form, like this phantom midge larva you can see here, and the real estate was getting a bit tight, as you can see by this custody battle over a really great spot. You can see the non-pupated larva beneath, pulling the pupa down into his lair. For what purpose, I'm not yet sure. And a quick water boatman check. As you can see, these are very healthy and free from that initial infestation. And all of these came from that second pond excursion, which turned out to be a great idea. By day 17, the walls were covered in these little phantom midge larvae homes that each of them have created. And I caught my first glimpse after a long while of the dragonfly naiad, having just molted. And now, one by one, the many rat-tailed maggots began to lose their tails and go up to the top of the jar to pupate. I kept getting glimpses of the dragonfly naiad, and you can see its abdomen pulsating here as it breathes through gills. But this is one of the most voracious predators in the pond. Just have a look at this jaw. Pretty scary stuff. Here it is in slow motion. Their jaw can actually extend an incredible distance to help latch on to the prey. Here's a poor, unsuspecting baby water boatman. I love how it wriggles its butt before it makes the strike. Just about every day at this point, I had to open the lid and let out a drone fly. You can see I put a pothos in the pot as well, which unfortunately didn't do well at all, but that's okay. There's plenty of oxygen in the tank as it is. Many insects continue to pupate and fly out of the tank. You can see here our very first phantom midge. Now, we haven't really talked about nematodes yet. There are approximately 400 quintillion nematodes on this planet, 57 billion for every single human being. You can see them wriggling there on the bottom alongside a whole bunch of single-celled organisms, possibly paramecium. Here's our solitary, trusty snail scraping on the jar with his radula, and a wonderful little ostracod. At this point, there were 2 rat tails left, and they had turned a kind of strange milky white, as you can see here. And a little update on that tiny brown-butted beetle living his best life, even many weeks into this jar. I didn't look at the tank for a couple of days, and on day 35 I was astonished to see that many, many snails had emerged out of nowhere. Of course, snails can asexually reproduce, but it is also possible that there were some dormant eggs in one of my initial scoops. Anyway, really incredible to have all these new snails here. Also at this time, I discovered dozens and dozens of new worms on day 45. These are just plain old aquatic worms, and they emerged at the bottom of the tank against the glass. So much life almost 2 months into this jar, and many of it only just now appearing. We can say goodbye to yet another midge fly as it takes its first flight. And at this time, a lot of the young water boatmen had started to grow up. You can see here various sizes, various generations, and they were living in a quite healthy way, which is actually quite difficult to achieve. Also around this time, I discovered yet another new organism. Let's see if you can spot what it is. The telltale sign of this organism is those feather-like gills in the back, and this is, of course, a damselfly larva. They are also incredibly voracious predators, so as you can see here, I removed this one to another tank. And later on, I would find 3 more of them in the tank. I had no idea they were there before. So there you have it, 3 months into this jar, and it's doing great. The plants are still thriving, the water boatmen are numerous, and the water is pretty clear. At the time of filming this video, a couple months later, there are even more discoveries, so perhaps I'll make a follow-up video, but for now, I really hope you can all make your very own closed jar ecosystem. Thanks for watching.